We've all been there. That moment when a new person enters your orbit and the air around them seems to, I don't know, vibrate differently. You
Yes.
feel the classic butterflies, right? Maybe you smile a little too much when you see their name pop up on your phone.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the quintessential crush. It's exciting, it's a little dramatic, and generally it's this enjoyable sort of transient rush of pure novelty and hope.
It is the material of legends, isn't it? I mean, those early moments of intense, focused attraction that artists, poets, songwriters, they've all documented this for thousands of years, describing it as, the height of human feeling.
Exactly, but there's a critical psychological point where that rush of enjoyment just stops.
Right.
When do those butterflies, which are really just your sympathetic nervous system getting excited, when do they turn into this deeply anxious, demanding, all-consuming flock of bats?
That's a great way to put it.
When does the simple pleasure of liking someone graduate into a relentless, exhausting, and often painful fixation? We're talking about the shift from a fun infatuation to something that feels less like a healthy emotion and, I mean, more like an emotional dependence.
That is precisely the core territory we are mapping out today.
Yeah.
We are diving into a state of mind that moves past the realm of normal crushes and casual affection, exploring the experience formerly studied and termed limerence.
Limerence.
Yes. And the term was coined specifically to separate this intense, often disruptive obsession from ordinary, comfortable, or even fleeting love.
And it's fascinating how timely this is. I mean, while this concept has been around since the 1960s, it's having a major cultural moment right now.
It really is.
You see the term everywhere on social media feeds, especially on TikTok, in discussions about anxious attachment or these overwhelming emotional experiences. People are using limerence because they recognize that what they feel is far more complicated and distressing than just having a typical passing crush. It's validating an experience that often feels really isolating.
It provides essential language. I mean, for too long, this overwhelming state was often dismissed with these reductive phrases like, oh, you're just lovesick, or stop being silly.
Right.
Limerence gives us the structure to understand the difference between merely liking someone and that feeling of being absolutely madly in love, particularly when the crucial element, the return of that feeling, is completely up in the air.
So it's the not knowing.
That uncertainty is the key. It's the engine for the entire dynamic.
Okay, so let's establish the boundaries then. We need to nail down exactly what limerence is based on the foundational psychological studies.
Well, you must. And we should begin with the core definition. Limerence is a mental state of intense infatuation or being madly in love, but its defining characteristic is that this intense desire is coupled with this overwhelming anxiety that comes from uncertainty.
So it's the desire plus the anxiety.
Precisely. You are intensely longing for reciprocation, for the other person, who we call the limerent object or low, to return that passion. But you do not know, and you certainly cannot control, if they feel the same way. That persistent doubt is the engine that drives the whole emotional roller coaster.
That immediately prompts an important question for me about scope.
Okay.
If I am in a long-term committed marriage and I am wildly, passionately in love with my spouse, is that still limerence? Because the passion is intense, but the uncertainty of reciprocation is, presumably gone.
That's a fantastic question. And based on the original concept, no, it generally ceases to be limerence. The term was coined explicitly to describe this specific state of highly unstable, uncertain obsession.
Oh, okay.
It's contrasted with stable, secure attachment. Limerence is defined by its intensity and its volatility. Once the desired reciprocation is achieved and secured, the state typically transitions or cures itself, and it evolves into a different, more secure form of love.
So it's not a formal disorder or diagnosis then, it's more of a descriptive concept.
Exactly. It's sometimes informally called love madness because of the distress it causes, but it is not a formal diagnosis. It's just fundamentally different from stable, enduring companionship.
That clarifies the vital difference between limerence and, say, a run-of-the-mill crush. A crush is usually just the pleasant background feature of life, right?
Precisely. A simple crush is generally enjoyable, fleeting, and it eventually fades naturally into a pleasant memory. Limerence, on the other hand, is often distressing and persistent. It clings to your mental bandwidth for far longer than is comfortable.
So that's the real distinction.
It's critical. If this feeling is causing you significant emotional distress, if it's consuming your thoughts to the exclusion of other priorities and impacting your daily functioning, You have definitively crossed the line from a crush into the demanding world of limerence.
It's the point where a crush has completely taken over your life.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
And let's distinguish it from a parasocial relationship, like having an extreme admiration for a celebrity or a public figure. You might think about them constantly, but is that limerence?
It's a great comparison. And while both involve fantasy and admiration, there is a key functional difference. A parasocial relationship is, by definition, one-sided, and you know it.
Right. There's no real expectation of connection.
Exactly. So the emotional investment kind of stabilizes. Limerence, however, carries this intense emotional volatility and urgency because there is a perceived, even if it's remote or you've manufactured it, possibility of connection.
So there's hope.
There's hope. And the sheer desperation to see the relationship, or at least the passion reciprocated, drive these dramatic and often painful mood swings. The lack of clarity is the core stressor.
So the equation is intensity plus volatile uncertainty. That separates it from both secure love and distant admiration.
You've got it.
Which brings up the question of how common this truly is. If it's so disruptive, are we talking about some rare mental state?
You'd think so, but it's quite the opposite. Limerence is an extremely common human experience.
Really?
Yes. Data gathered from surveys and studies indicate that a significant majority of people, we're talking somewhere between 50% and 64% of the population, have experienced limerence at least once in their lives.
Wow, half to two-thirds of people. That's huge.
It is huge, which suggests it is a natural, if intense, aspect of the human bonding and mate selection process.
But what's the stat that really gets you?
The one that really underscores its severity is the distress factor. For as many as 32% of those surveyed, this state was so profoundly distressing that it genuinely interfered with their ability to enjoy or even function normally in daily life.
So for a third of people who feel it, it's not just a phase.
It wasn't just a quirky phase, no. It was a severely disruptive emotional state that impacted their work, their friendships, their mental health.
That's incredible.
This shows us that while the mechanism is common, its impact is far from benign. Understanding limerence validates that disruption. It assures you that you are experiencing a defined, powerful psychological phenomenon, not just a personal failure to cope with attraction.
That frame of reference is crucial. It's a powerful experience that demands respect, not dismissal. Okay, if that's the definition, let's move into the day-to-day reality of it. What are the concrete behavioral and cognitive signs that someone is no longer just crushing, but is in the throes of limerence?
Well, the primary indicator that the transition has occurred is this shift from voluntary interest to involuntary, all-consuming cognitive obsession.
I would assume the hallmark is just thinking about the person a lot, but how much is a lot in the context of limerence?
The degree of fixation is almost incapacitating.
Yeah.
Intrusive thinking is the cardinal trait that sets limerence apart. We are not talking about pleasant daydreams here.
No.
No, this is foremost a state of cognitive obsession, where thoughts about the limerent object are involuntary and recurrent, and they just demand your mental attention.
Okay, so give us the numbers on this cognitive hijacking.
The studies paint a staggering picture. People in this state report spending, on average, a minimum of 65% of their waking hours consumed by thoughts of the LO.
65%.
Minimum. And at the height of the obsessive phase, when the uncertainty is most acute, some individuals report spending nearly 100% of their day and night dwelling in reverie, replaying past interactions, or plotting future ones.
Nearly 100%. That is not just distracted. That is fundamentally impaired functioning. How does someone maintain a job or focus on school with that level of cognitive drain?
They often don't, or they struggle immensely. This severe intrusive thinking hijacks your executive function. It interferes with focus, it severely degrades work performance, and it leads to profound emotional exhaustion.
It's a full-time job.
The mental energy spent constantly processing the LO's possible feelings, analyzing texts, searching for any sign of reciprocation. It leads to neglect of basic duties, social isolation, chronic anxiety. It's an internal monologue that just never stops, making simple tasks feel insurmountable.
And in the modern world, this intrusive thinking takes on a very specific digital flavor, right? It's not just replaying a conversation in your head. It's a detailed strategic analysis of their online presence.
Absolutely. The need for information fuels the obsession. Limerent thinking today involves complex digital forensics.
Forensics, I like that.
Might mean endlessly analyzing the time delay between when you sent a text and when the LO replied, trying to determine if a 4-minute gap signifies casual disinterest or deep contemplation.
Oh, we've all done that.
Of course. It involves checking their last seen timestamp on messaging apps or deep diving into their social media history, not maliciously, but simply out of that desperate emotional dependence on connection and data. You're looking for crumbs, and social media is a giant bakery of crumbs.
A giant bakery of crumbs. And the content of that endless thinking isn't just dwelling on the person, it's active, detailed fantasy.
Yes, fantasizing about the LO is inescapable and provides some transient relief. But it's crucial that limerent fantasy remains somewhat tethered to reality. For it to be psychologically sustaining, it has to feel realistic enough to be at least possible.
Even if the fantasies themselves are, wildly elaborate.
Exactly.
So what are some examples of that intricate strategy planning that the original research described?
It's often characterized by meticulously plotting a hoped-for future interaction. It's rehearsing the perfect lines in case you bump into them at the grocery store.
Right.
Mapping out an elaborate scenario where you are suddenly thrown together, or imagining these grand rescue scenes. One informant recalled an elaborate scenario where he protected his LO from peril, only for her to finally confess her feelings.
So dramatic.
Even if the content is absurdly dramatic, the core purpose of the fantasy is practical. It is strategy planning to anticipate and maximize the chance of achieving that ecstatic moment of reciprocation. The fantasy serves as a temporary bridge from the painful reality of uncertainty to the blissful goal of union.
Now we come to what is arguably the most psychologically stunning aspect of limerence: crystallization. This is about how the LO is perceived.
Cryptalization is this profound psychological mechanism where the limerent object is viewed in a highly favorable, enhanced, or idealized light. The term itself is beautiful, originating from the 19th century French writer Stendhal.
Stendhal, right.
He famously used the analogy of a tree branch tossed into a salt mine. After months submerged, the branch is pulled out, not as rotten wood, but covered in shimmering salt crystals, transforming it into an object of extraordinary perceived beauty.
So the LO's original features, the branch, are still there, but they are utterly enhanced and covered in this layer of emotional perfection.
Precisely. The original researcher, Dorothy Tenoff, specifically preferred crystallization over idealization, because idealization suggests you're molding the LO to fit a performed mental template.
Okay, I see.
Crystallization argues that the actual existing features of the LO undergo this radical positive enhancement by the observer. The limerent person isn't delusional, they're simply hyper-focusing on the positive.
Okay, so how does the limerent mind deal with actual noticeable flaws in the LO then? Say the LO is chronically irresponsible or known to be cruel.
This is where the magic of crystallization truly manifests. The person experiencing limerence does notice these flaws. They know the LO struggles with commitment or is consistently late or might even have a severe behavioral issue.
They see it, but
But instead of seeing these as negatives that should deter them, they either overlook them entirely or, even more remarkably, they find profound compassion or a beautiful narrative for those negative traits.
can you give us a concrete example of that rationalization?
Certainly, if the LO is lazy and never accomplishes anything, the limerent person doesn't see laziness. They see a deep, misunderstood soul contemplating the universe, burdened by genius.
Wow.
If the LO is chronically late, they see it as charming spontaneity or someone too busy helping others to worry about rigid schedules. If the LO is emotionally distant or prone to cheating, the limerent person rationalizes this as a sign of their passionate nature or deep, unhealed emotional pain that only the limerent person can fix. The flaw is twisted into an indication of their complex humanity and their unique need for rescue.
That ability to emphasize the admirable and completely rationalize or gloss over the toxic is extraordinary. It makes the passion almost impervious to logic.
It does. It sustains the hope. Now, it's important to note the critical context here. While historically this idealization was sometimes seen as a problem, modern psychology recognizes it positive illusions.
Seeing your partner a little better than they see themselves.
Exactly. That actually contributes significantly to relationship satisfaction and long-term well-being in established, healthy relationships. But in the limerent state, this idealization is intense, non-reciprocated, and driven purely by the agonizing hope of union.
So the head and heart are totally consumed, operating in this enhanced reality. But what is the physical price for this obsession? I mean, we call it lovesickness for a reason.
The physical toll is immense because the emotional state mirrors a constant state of emergency. The physiological effects stem directly from the sympathetic nervous system being constantly activated.
Fight or flight.
Your body is in perpetual fight-or-flight mode, ready for the threat of rejection or the reward of contact.
What are the specific symptoms people report?
They are dramatic and uncomfortable. We see trembling, pallor, flushing, a generalized sense of weakness or fatigue. Excessive sweating is common, and the classic butterflies in the stomach are often much more severe than mere nerves.
How so?
They can represent actual gastrointestinal distress and, in extreme cases, heart arrhythmia due to the massive sympathetic action releasing adrenaline and norepinephrine.
And that aching in the chest, is that physically localized? Is that a real thing?
It is remarkably consistent. When interviewees in the original studies were asked where they felt the sensation of limerence, when the certainty was strongest, they pointed unerringly to the center front of their chest. An aching, tight sensation, sometimes described as a dull, chronic pain that only subsided upon the slightest indication of reciprocation.
Wow. And finally, the behavioral manifestation when the LO is actually present.
Even normally confident, composed people report an incapacitating but always unsettling shyness or severe stage fright in the LO's presence.
They just fall apart.
They become clumsy, struggle to articulate simple thoughts, and may avoid eye contact. This is driven by a deep, paralyzing fear of failure, the fear that their own actions, words, or awkwardness might accidentally bring about the disaster of definitive rejection. That cocktail of cognitive obsession, physical distress, and social paralysis is what makes limerence such a painful, full-body commitment.
Okay, so to really understand why this is so consuming, we have to look under the hood. We have to look at the brain chemistry.
To fully grasp the consuming nature of this state, we must shift our focus to the neural circuitry. The early, intense, high-stakes stage of romantic love, which is limerence, is neurologically so powerful that it is almost universally compared to a behavioral addiction.
It makes sense. I mean, if something is consuming nearly 100% of your waking thoughts, that's fixation, and fixation implies dependence on the substance.
Exactly. And in this case, the substance is the loved person, or, more accurately, the pursuit of the loved person and the uncertainty surrounding the reward.
We hear about the brain on drugs, but what does the brain look like when it's on limerence?
Well, sophisticated fMRI studies have mapped the neural activity. When people who are intensely, newly in love are shown a photograph of their beloved, specific areas of the brain's reward system light up dramatically.
Which areas are we talking about?
The two main areas involved in driving this obsession are the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, and the nucleus accumbens and caudate nucleus.
Okay, let's slow down and focus on the VTA and its output, dopamine, since that's the powerhouse chemical here.
The VTA is the manufacturing center for dopamine. It projects these dopamine pathways out into the forebrain, and it essentially acts as the brain's motivational switchboard. When the LO is perceived, or even just imagined, the VTA fires, flooding those reward centers.
And crucially, we need to clarify what dopamine actually does because it's so often mislabeled as the pleasure chemical.
That distinction is paramount. Dopamine's primary function is not to generate pleasure, but to generate wanting, which neuroscientists call incentive salience.
Wanting, not liking.
Exactly. Dopamine dictates the compulsion, the focus, and the craving. It's the mechanism that says, go get the reward. Pleasure, or liking, involves different brain regions and different opioids. The dopamine system acts like a powerful, insistent magnet, pulling a person relentlessly toward the specific reward object, the LO.
So if I am limerent, my VTA is screaming want, even if the reality of the interaction is often painful or damaging.
That is the core conflict of the addiction model. This helps us understand why individuals might be compelled to seek out a rejected ex-partner or someone who treats them poorly. They want the person because the neural pathway of incentive salience is active, even if they no longer consciously like the LO or wish for the pain that comes with the interaction.
It's a compulsion.
It is. This behavioral overlap is why intense, early romantic love shows such striking parallels with substance abuse, including the intense energy, exhilaration, anxiety, sleep disturbances, and loss of appetite that mirror a stimulant high, like cocaine.
That addiction analogy brings us back to limerence's primary fuel, uncertainty. How does the uncertainty maintain this obsessive craving?
The obsession is not just maintained by hope, it is actively turbocharged by situational uncertainty. The underlying psychological mechanism is virtually identical to that of a gambler, intermittent reinforcement.
The slot machine analogy again, it keeps you pulling the lever.
It's the perfect parallel. If the LO gave you clear, consistent love and attention, your brain would habituate. The VTA activity would calm down, allowing the limerent state to transition into secure attachment.
But that's not what happens.
However, when rewards, a text message, A brief sign of attention, a sudden phone call, are unpredictable. The system is kept acutely engaged. The VGA is always on high alert, thinking the next interaction might be the payoff.
And this is where modern communication practices tragically intersect with ancient biology. We see this play out constantly with breadcrumbing or mixed signals.
Precisely. Mixed signals, where the LO ignores the limerent person for a period, then suddenly reappears with minimal, fleeting attention act like potent gasoline poured on the dopamine fire.
It's the worst thing you can do to someone in that state.
This unpredictability prevents the emotional state from fading or habituating. It confirms just enough hope to prevent clear rejection, forcing the dopamine system to remain in that highly volatile wanting mode.
So, the agony and the ecstasy are directly tied to the interpretation of the LO's latest action. If they text back immediately, bliss. If they disappear for 48 hours, agony.
That's the emotional oscillation. And it is exhausting. Intermittent reinforcement ensures that state of high alert and consumption continues, sometimes indefinitely, leading to the prolonged distress state that can last far beyond its natural evolutionary mandate. The limerent person becomes an emotional detective, constantly searching for signals, and the brain is trapped by the very system designed to propel bonding.
It's astonishing that a psychological state this stressful and debilitating is so common. That forces us to ask the bigger evolutionary question. Why would nature subject us to this demanding, painful system in the first place?
The reason is simple and cold: reproductive success. Romantic love is not a single emotion. It's best understood as a three-stage, independent, often overlapping motivational system that has evolved over millennia to ensure survival and successful reproduction.
Let's break down those three stages again: lust, attraction, and attachment.
We can view them almost chronologically in a potential relationship, though they often overlap. The first is lust. This is the generalized sex drive, motivated primarily by sex steroids like testosterone in both sexes.
Its purpose is simple.
Very simple. Generalized copulation with any compatible individual to promote reproduction. It's an appetite, not a focus system. Injecting testosterone increases sexual drive, but it doesn't tether you to one person.
Then comes the state we're discussing: attraction or limerence.
Attraction is the focus system. This is nature's energy-saving device. Its evolutionary advantage is that it causes the individual to focus all their massive energy and mental resources onto a single preferred potential mate, saving time and ensuring mating and resources are targeted efficiently.
And this is the dopamine and high stress phase.
This system is chemically characterized by the high activity of dopamine for wanting and focus, and norepinephrine for high stress and alertness. This intense focus is metabolically expensive, which is why, if successful, it is naturally short-lived, typically 18 months to 3 years.
The ultimate goal of attraction, then, is to keep the pair bonded long enough for the third stage to kick in.
Exactly. That is attachment. This system is designed for the long-term bond, facilitating shared parental duties, companionship, and creating the secure, stable environment necessary for raising vulnerable offspring. It signals the transition away from the manic urgency of limerence and towards stable companionship.
And the chemical cocktail changes dramatically here. We shift away from dopamine and high stress to the comfort hormones.
We shift to oxytocin and vasopressin. These are the hormones of long-term bonding, and they work in opposition to the stress chemicals of limerence.
Tell us about oxytocin.
Oxytocin is often called the cuddle hormone or the trust hormone. It's released powerfully through physical touch, emotional connection, and eye contact. Critically, oxytocin promotes overall relaxation, reduces fear, and actively inhibits the release of stress hormones like cortisol and norepinephrine.
So it's the antidote to the anxiety of limerence.
It's the mechanism that replaces high-stress desire with deep trust and social support between partners. It's the sense of security and safety that stable love provides.
What about vasopressin?
Vasopressin, or antidiuretic hormone, promotes fierce, long-term commitment and strengthens monogamous bonds. Studies have shown that it plays a significant role in parental behavior and even territorial protection of the mate and offspring. The successful transition in a relationship is the biological shift from that high dopamine, high stress, norepinephrine-fueled state of limerence to the low stress, oxytocin and vasopressin-rich state of secure attachment.
Since limerence has this natural expiry date, if it's successful, is there a chemical mechanism that signals this transition, preventing the intense manic obsession from going on forever?
Research strongly suggests there is, and it involves a protein called nerve growth factor, or NGF.
Nerve growth factor.
Yes. NGF levels are observed to be significantly high in the early manic stages of romantic love. NGF plays a complex role in mediating anxiety, emotional regulation, and behavior. These high levels of NGF return to basal levels, normal, non-elevated levels, roughly a year after the successful beginning of a committed, stable romantic relationship.
So the body almost chemically schedules the reduction of the manic high alert state. It's like a timer goes off.
It appears so. Since NGF is known to regulate social bonding and specifically induces the production of vasopressin, that crucial hormone for long-term commitment, it may indeed be the key chemical checkpoint that signals the relationship has progressed from short-term attraction to the stage where long-term attachment hormones must take over for co-parenting success.
Before we move on, let's circle back to the initial attraction part. Beyond surface-level features like beauty or status, evolution utilizes a fascinating layer of chemical signaling for mate selection, the odor system.
This is truly one of the most incredible biological discoveries regarding human attraction. On a fundamental, unconscious level, we are seeking a partner who provides the best genetic fit for our offspring's survival. This is linked to the major histocompatibility complex, or MHC genes, which govern the strength and diversity of our immune system resistance.
So we literally seek partners whose immune systems complement ours.
Precisely. Pheromones, which are chemical signals secreted by our sweat glands, primarily in the face, underarms, and genital areas, signal the composition of these MHC proteins. And the body subconsciously prefers a partner with dissimilar or complementary MHC genes.
How do researchers even prove this incredible unconscious preference for complementary genes?
The most famous evidence comes from the T-shirt experiment studies.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Women were given T-shirts that had been worn by men for several nights. They were then asked to smell the shirts and rate which odor they found most pleasant and attractive.
And the result?
Researchers discovered that, overwhelmingly, women preferred the scents of men whose MHC genes were most complementary to their own.
That is profound. It's an evolutionary mechanism ensuring that the coupling results in offspring with the most diverse and resilient immune system possible.
It's chemical pragmatism disguised as attraction. The only time this preference seems to be disrupted is if the woman is taking hormonal birth control. Studies suggest that hormonal contraceptives can temporarily trick the body into preferring partners with similar MHC genes, which is biologically disadvantageous for offspring.
Wow.
This odor system is believed to be one of the oldest senses driving mate choice, ensuring reproductive success on a foundational, unconscious level.
So the old cliche that we have chemistry with someone is entirely literal. It's based on how our immune systems smell each other.
It is.
We've established that limerence is intensely biological, driven by ancient evolutionary mandates. But we have to turn to the painful reality. When this massive biological system fires up and goes unrequited, the cost is intense pain.
We call this acute result lovesickness, and it's profoundly disruptive. When limerence fails to transition into mutual ecstatic union, the individual experiences those addictive cravings, deep frustration, profound melancholy, and often clinical depression, all underpinned by relentless intrusive thinking.
How severe is this distress? I mean, really?
The studies are sobering. The original research found that 42% of participants reported being severely depressed about a love affair, and a deeply worrying 17% stated they often thought of committing suicide while in the grips of this agonizing state.
17%.
While limerence itself is not the cause of self-harm, the intense despair and frustration it generates can certainly augment and distort other underlying conditions into something genuinely harmful.
And neurobiology confirms this isn't just emotional melodrama, it registers as genuine physical pain in the brain.
That's right. fMRI studies on individuals who had recently experienced definitive romantic rejection showed activation in areas of the brain associated with physical pain, specifically the secondary somatosensory cortex and the dorsal posterior insula.
The same areas that light up with a burn or a cut?
Essentially, yes. These are also the areas that light up with intense craving and when assessing gains and losses, showing that the experience is one of acute loss combined with persistent, painful withdrawal. This state is debilitating, leading to self-isolation and chronic emotional exhaustion.
Now let's consider the other party in this dynamic, the limerent object. If they don't reciprocate, how does the fixation from the limerent person impact them?
The LO often feels an enormous, suffocating burden. While initial attention may be flattering, the sheer intensity, the volatility, and the persistent neediness quickly become overwhelming and uncomfortable. The LO can feel pressured to return feelings that simply aren't there, or they can experience genuine guilt, if they don't reciprocate the depth of devotion they perceive.
That sounds like a relationship dynamic built on anxiety and obligation.
It is. If the boundaries are not clearly and decisively set, the limerent person's cognitive obsession can turn into real-world boundary violations, leading to strained relationships, anxiety for the LO, and ultimately a damaged connection. The LO often ends up feeling resentful that they've been idealized into something they are not, and pressured to perform an emotional role they didn't audition for.
So if this state is involuntary, obsessive, and painful for all involved, the most critical section of our dive is this. Can we control it? Is it possible to regulate or mitigate such a powerful biological drive?
Absolutely. The notion that these intense feelings are uncontrollable is a deep-seated misconception. New research, particularly focusing on cognitive behavioral strategies and neurobiological regulation, demonstrates that love feelings can be regulated through conscious, focused effort.
We are not slaves to our VTA.
We are not.
Let's start with the key cognitive strategy. How do you train your mind to stop finding the LO perfect?
That is the principle behind cognitive reappraisal. This involves consciously reframing and disrupting the intrusive thoughts. When the unwanted daydreams about the LO inevitably occur, and they will, sometimes dozens of times an hour, the individual must immediately engage in negative reappraisal.
That means actively focusing on the negative qualities or flaws that crystallization has conveniently glossed over.
Precisely. This is often called the daymare strategy, because you are deliberately spoiling the euphoric reward of the fantasy.
A daymare. I like that.
If you catch yourself daydreaming about the LO's beautiful smile, you must immediately pivot your mental focus and remind yourself, that person is financially irresponsible, or she's disrespectful to service workers, or he constantly flirts with other people, which makes me miserable.
So it's not just a passing thought. It has to be a mental intervention that is repeated every single time the fantasy begins.
It demands extreme mental discipline. Some experts recommend physically writing down a detailed list of the LO's flaws, the real-world negative consequences of their actions, and undesirable future scenarios like imagining the arguments or the eventual painful breakup.
And read it every day.
Read the list daily. The goal is to condition the brain to associate the LO, not with euphoria and hope, but with concrete negativity and pain. By consistently making the daydream unpleasant, you decrease the emotional reward tied to the infatuation, eventually weakening the dopamine-craving pathways. While this strategy can cause a short-term decrease in mood, it is profoundly effective at decreasing infatuation over time.
And the second major strategy stems directly from the addiction model we discussed, the withdrawal protocol.
Which is the no-contact protocol. If the obsession is maintained by intermittent reinforcement, then recovery requires immediately removing all environmental and digital triggers. This is not about being angry. It is about starving the dopamine system of its unexpected fix.
In the modern context, this is much harder than just throwing away old letters. It's a logistical challenge.
It is a decisive, necessary surgical strike. It means deleting the person's number, removing them entirely from all social media platforms. And that means unfollowing, blocking, and sometimes even blocking third-party contacts.
You have to be ruthless.
You must avoid all unnecessary physical contact with the LO. If you work with them, you create firm professional barriers. If you share a friend group, you may need to temporarily avoid group settings.
The moment of weakness is when the phone is pulled out. A quick search for their name or analyzing who liked their latest post.
And that search provides the crumb that resets the clock on withdrawal. You are literally starving the incentive salient system. Addiction specialists know that without triggers, the craving pathway eventually atrophies. If all hope of reciprocation is clearly and definitively ended, limerence subsides because its core fuel uncertainty is gone.
And this leads to an important point for the limerent object who's trying to manage the situation. Ambiguity is cruel.
Absolutely. The limerent object should practice radical honesty and clarity. Any vague, ambiguous statements like, I like you as a friend, but, or maybe in the future, are interpreted by the limerent mind as the exact intermittent reinforcement it needs to intensify the obsession.
So a clean break is a kindness.
Clear, decisive rejection is the only way to starve the hope necessary for the state to intensify. It allows the limerent person to begin the difficult process of regulation.
So beyond simple avoidance, what else aids recovery?
The strategy is to fill the vacuum of obsessive thinking with high-demand, high-engagement activities. The limerent mind is looking for focus. You replace the focus on the LO with focus on new, engaging, and self-expanding activities, new hobbies, demanding work projects, challenging physical fitness goals, or intense learning. This distraction facilitates the recovery process, helping the person rebuild a life centered around their own responsibilities and interests, not around the pursuit of the yellow. It takes mental endurance, but the outcome is reclaiming your own cognitive bandwidth.
This has been a deep and revealing examination. We've moved far beyond the initial familiar crush and explored limerence as a specific, intense, and biologically driven form of passionate attraction. It is separated from typical affection by the presence of pervasive intrusive thinking and the constant agonizing uncertainty of reciprocation.
We saw how this intense state is fueled by the brain's primal reward system. Dopamine, generating the wanting and the intermittent reinforcement of mixed signals, keeping the obsession alive like a persistent, painful gambling compulsion. The successful path, if reciprocation is achieved, is that this intense, stressful passion naturally fades, transitioning into companionate love, a stable affection rooted in the low-stress security of oxytocin and vasopressin.
The ultimate goal is that transition. We know that brain scans of long-term happy couples show the reward centers are still active. The desire is there, but the anxiety, stress, and obsessive thinking areas are significantly less engaged. The mania has subsided, replaced by the deep pleasure signals tied to companionship and security. Stability, it turns out, is the antithesis of limerence.
And that transition point is key, because limerence is an evolutionary feature designed to propel us into bonding, ensuring the species survives. It is a biological imperative, even if it feels like personal misery.
To leave you with a final, provocative thought to take away from this deep dive, I want you to remember that old quote. Love is like an hourglass, with the heart filling up as the brain empties. The concept of romantic passion overriding rational thought is an evolutionary mandate designed to push two people together to raise children, regardless of the personal cost or temporary loss of rationality.
Given that limerence evolved to cement a relationship long enough for that initial period, a phase naturally lasting perhaps 2 years, and is fiercely fueled by uncertainty and intermittent reinforcement, consider this.
How might modern dating culture, where vague, delayed texting, online avoidance, and deliberate breadcrumbing are common social practices, often facilitated by dating apps that prioritize novelty over commitment, be artificially prolonging this intense, distressing biological state?
What cultural or digital practices might be inadvertently making it harder for people to either achieve the blissful clarity of definite reciprocity, or perhaps more necessary for the individual's sanity, achieve the clear, decisive, unambiguous rejection that is required for this agonizing biological state to finally and completely end? That's the modern psychological paradox of limerence.